for Spurgeon, the absolute control of all events, even the most horrible gout pain, which we'll see later on, if that is not controlled and ruled and assigned and appointed by a heavenly physician who knows and loves, then it's not something to be debated, but there's just no survival. The doctrine of God's sovereignty is not first debate for Spurgeon, it's a means of survival. Our afflictions are the health regimen of an infinitely wise physician. He told his students this: I dare say the greatest earthly blessing that God can give to any of us is health, with the exception of sickness. If some men that I know of could only be favored with a month of rheumatism, it would be God's grace to mellow them marvelously. And he meant that for himself, because he said, I'm afraid that all the grace that I have got of my comfortable and easy times and happy hours might almost lie on a penny. But the good that I have received from my sorrows and pains and griefs is altogether incalculable. He had three designs. He saw three designs of God in his depression. Number one, it functioned like the Apostle Paul's thorn of the flesh to keep him humble and to show that the power belongs to the Lord. He said, those who are honored of their Lord in public, and he was honored and he knew he was honored. He knew he had the biggest church in the world. He knew he was eloquent. He knew his books were selling by the millions. He knew he could make as much money as he wanted. He knew God had honored him. Those who are honored of the Lord in public have usually to endure a secret chastening or to carry a peculiar cross, lest by any means they exalt themselves and fall into the snare of the devil. I think the same can be said of churches, probably. Second design of depression. It gave an unexpected power to his ministry. Listen to this story. And you all know stories like this from your own life, I'll bet. One Sabbath morning, I preached from the text, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And though I did not say so, yet I preached my own experience. I heard my own chains clank while I tried to preach to my fellow prisoners in the dark. But I could not tell why I was brought into such an awful horror of darkness for which I condemned myself. On the following Monday evening, a man came to see me who bore all the marks of despair upon his countenance. His hair seemed to stand upright. His eyes were ready to start from their sockets. He said to me after a little parleying, I never before in my life heard any man speak who seemed to know my heart. Mine is a terrible case, but on Sunday morning you painted me to the life and preached as if you had been inside my soul. By God's grace, I saved that man from suicide and led him into gospel light and liberty. But I know I could not have done it if I had not myself been confined in the dungeon in which he lay. I tell you the story, brethren, because you sometimes may not understand your own experience, and the perfect people may condemn you for having it. But what know they of God's servants? It was an unusual one. It has to do with this Artaxerxes Darius thing. He said, I have learned that it is a prophetic signal for the future. Quote, this depression comes over me whenever the Lord is preparing a larger blessing for my ministry. The cloud is black before it breaks and overshadows, before it yields its deluge of mercy. Depression has now become to me as a prophet in rough clothing, a John the Baptist heralding the nearer coming of my Lord's richer benison. So I would say on this first point that the sovereignty of God, holding, controlling, designing the darkest of our days, corporately as a people, individually, family, are Joseph-like days in the dungeon just before you become the king of Egypt. Or Artaxerxes' days when the temple is shut down just before Darius not only revives the temple but says, and I'll pay for it. And I don't know what that'll look like in your life, but if you believe, number one, in Romans 8:28, and number two, in the sovereignty of God, that will carry you through. Number two, we're talking about Spurgeon's tactics of enduring adversity. Number two, with the theological survival strategy comes the natural means of survival that God has appointed in His providence in nature and in rest. You might wonder why I put this second, because I have more spiritual ones to come. I just put it second because it just seems so essential as I've counseled some of you and as I've taken stock of myself, and I'll try to explain. For all of his talk about spending and being spent and being burned up for the kingdom and laying down your life and dying early, nevertheless, he said, take a day off and keep the Sabbath in that way. He said, our Sabbath is a day of toil. And if we do not rest on some other day, we shall break down. Eric Hayden, who preached, who was the pastor of the tabernacle in the 50s, reminds us that Spurgeon, quote, kept when possible, I don't know what that word means, when possible, Wednesday as his day of rest. I don't know what makes it possible. More than that, Spurgeon said to his students, it is wisdom to take occasional furlough. In the long run, we shall do more by sometimes doing less. On, forever on, without recreation, may suit spirits emancipated from this heavy clay. But while we are in this tabernacle, we must every now and then cry, halt, and serve the Lord by holy inaction and consecrated leisure. Let no tender conscience, hear this now, let no tender conscience doubt the lawfulness of going out of the harness for a while. I can testify that 4 weeks extra that the church gave me last summer were precious and crucial beyond measure. So that when I came back, I could come back and I could go on. And I thank them, bless them for it. The press of duty, the foul air, the sedentary position, the season of fog. In Minnesota, we would say February, March. Does this thing ever end? He confesses sedentary habits have tendency to create despondency, especially in the months of fog. And then he counsels, a mouthful of sea air or a stiff walk in the wind's face would not give grace to the soul, but it would yield oxygen to the body, which is next best. Which is perhaps why I put it next best. Let me just give you a personal word now. I am finishing my 15th year at Bethlehem. And I turned 49 this month. I have maintained some close watch over this body for the last decade, watching it and what happens here. And my soul and the intertwining of my soul and my body. What I have noticed is that things are changing, have changed. Circumstances have changed. It's different to be the pastor of a church